Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Robots and Res Tape. As always, I am your host, Nick Schutt. And for everybody out here listening, really appreciate you guys. Appreciate the audience. You guys are the best part of the show. You make this thing successful. So thank you all so much. Happy to have my friend Jeff Riley on with me today. Jeff, how are you?
Good, how you doing?
Dude, it's another day in paradise. Thanks so much for asking. Really appreciate it and appreciate you coming on and doing this. I know you're very, very busy. And for everybody out there listening today, we're going to be really talking about AI in the education system, and the effect of technology on education over the last, call it, decade or so. So Jeff, for everybody that doesn't have the opportunity to know you yet, do you mind telling everybody out here a little bit about yourself, your background, and how you got here?
Sure. Well, I spent 32 years in public education. I started as a teacher in Baltimore City, Maryland. Then I came back to the Boston area where I'm from originally and worked as a counselor, assistant principal, principal, deputy superintendent, superintendent, and I ended my career as the commissioner of education in Massachusetts for the last 6.5 years. I was getting ready to retire, when my friends at MIT called and said, "Hey, we're launching a nonprofit out of AI on AI in education. Do you want to come help us?" And I said, "Can I say what I want?" And I think
Hmm.
they were a little concerned by that question. They said, "What do you mean?" Well, I said, "Well, 15 years ago, we didn't really regulate social media. And it
Hmm.
appears, based on some of the research that's coming out, that, our children's mental health has been affected with rising rates of anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and the like. And AI, while I think it's going to be and start the next revolution in education, also has some problems in it. So I
Hmm.
want to make sure that we can speak about this in an objective way so that we can make sure our kids use this technology both safely and productively.
Absolutely. And why do what really convinced you that leading a day of AI was worth, your continued work, and what really attracted you about the mission?
I think, we've done 30 years of what they call education reform, where we kind of put systems and structures, test scores and accountability in place. We really put a framework around what school should look like. And for the first 15 years, it worked. Test scores across the country rose.
Hmm.
We closed achievement gaps and things were really going well. But for the last 15 years, we've been in what I would call and what Tim Daly in Chicago calls an educational depression,
Hmm.
where test scores have flatlined. We've seen disengagement from students, and I think we need something new. And I think what artificial intelligence brings is the ability to take away a lot of the administrative minutia that teachers have been handcuffed with, while at the same time giving them back the time and space to build excellent, exciting curriculum that are more engaging for kids. And perhaps most importantly on artificial intelligence is the ability for teachers now to differentiate and personalize instruction in a way we just never could before.
Yeah, absolutely. When you're doing it manually, I would assume that, it would be incredibly time consuming and unable to do it. However, when you can personalize a lesson with a push of a button and have the system do it for you, where you're still teaching the basic fundamental lesson, but you can personalize the delivery method, right? I think that's absolutely awesome.
Well, that's exactly right, Nick. And I think the example I like to give is if you're a middle school and eighth grade science teacher and you have to teach engineering and the design process, and maybe you want to teach about the Big Dig, which was a construction project here in Massachusetts where they took the elevated highway and buried it underneath the ground in a tunnel.
Mhm.
Great. Well, most of your kids in middle school are reading at a middle school level, but you've got one kid who's reading at a second grade level and you've got another kid in your class who's reading at a college level.
Hmm.
And for the first time, you're going to be able to beam a summary of the Big Dig written at a second grade level to that one kid without embarrassing them, and a one-page summary to the kid reading at a college level, written at a college level to that kid,
Hmm.
keeping him engaged. And then the other kids get a one-page summary of, middle school level, and then they can all do the activity together. And so for
Hmm.
the first time, you can make sure you're not just teaching to the middle of the class, but you're reaching all of your kids in a way that works for them.
100%. And that's absolutely something that like I wish I had when I was a kid. I was generally like out towards the college level, whether it was math or reading or writing or anything. And a lot of the time was very, very bored in school because you were talking to me like, like you're being taught things that were taught in a way at a level that was no longer, that just wasn't engaging. And, like I wrapped lessons up. I was able to learn faster than a lot of the people I was in school with.
Well, I think, what you're talking about is what we're seeing data-wise across the country, where kids report being fairly engaged in elementary school, and that drops off precipitously by the time they get to middle school, and then is way down, incredibly low engagement by the time kids get to high school, where they're asking themselves, what does this have to do with the real world I'm going into?
Hmm.
This is above or below my grade level. It's not tailored to me, and the only place that data doesn't hold true, which is ironic and maybe not so much, is with vocational schools, where kids can see the connection to the real world every day, right? And so
Yeah.
now we have this technology that for the first time will allow teachers to truly differentiate in a way they just simply couldn't before.
Yeah, man. No, absolutely. And one of the things that you've already brought it up around smartphones and social media in schools, and I know like the first time we talked, that's an example I give of my concern about social media at large. That when you look at how the combination of the smartphone and Instagram in about 2010 led to these increased rates of mental health disorders among children. Can you, having been in the schools through, that whole process, what do you think some of the biggest mistakes that we made were?
Yeah, I mean, I think fundamentally we just didn't understand the power of that technology, the power of social media, the power of cell phones. We didn't understand that social media was being set up to keep kids addicted online,
Hmm.
right? It was, literally creating dopamine hits for kids and making them stay online. And the best example I can give you is on my last year as commissioner, on my way out the door, I put together a voluntary cell phone grant where districts could restrict or ban cell phone use in schools.
Hmm.
And within the first 2 weeks of schools implementing that, I got probably 5 or 6 calls from superintendents saying the same exact thing. Jeff, they're talking to each other in the lunchroom again,
Hmm.
right? Because kids had become so addicted to their phones that they were losing social skills and they weren't interacting with other humans that are
Hmm.
out there. And I think we've seen it's had an effect on our kids.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. And these banning cell phones in schools, did you essentially have like the lock bags where you could lock them up, and the kid could keep the phone on them, so and then they had to like go to a specific spot to get it open, or how did they work?
Yeah, so we gave out grants and allowed districts to do this in different ways. Some districts had cell phone hotels that they set up where the kids had to put the cell phone away in a specific area. A lot of people did what you're describing, which is the yonder pouches,
Hmm.
which were these special pouches where the kids would have to basically lock their phone up and it wouldn't unlock until the end of the day.
Hmm.
And I think what we found was it really did change the culture of schools. And teachers would admit, kids were more able to focus on what was happening and they weren't, hiding behind their friend
Hmm.
in class to check their Facebook or their TikTok or their Instagram account.
Yeah, no, and I mean, something I always like to tell people is that whenever I'm coaching a younger person, that like these social skills are called that. They're called that for a reason. It's a skill. It's something you work on. You're gonna, it's you're going to be awkward, and it's gonna be hard at first, but you just have to push and keep working on it. And as you continue to interact with people, you get better, you get more comfortable having that conversation. And how do you think that the lack of socialization over the last 15 years, especially with the COVID period in there as well, how do you think that that has affected folks that are young adults now?
Well, I think there's been a serious effect. I mean, look, I think social media certainly played a role in disconnecting kids from each other. I've never seen a generation of kids more connected by technology to each other, but more disconnected from each other, if
Hmm.
that makes sense, right? And so with COVID, I think if we learn nothing, it's like if you take kids away from their peers, you're going to have major mental
Hmm.
health issues, right? Like there is a socialization process where kids need to be connected to other humans, and we've got to make sure that we find the right balance
Hmm.
between whatever technology we're using and that real, true human interaction.
Yeah, I absolutely 1,000% agree with you there. And I think that it's not just with kids now. I think that, you hear people talk about like the epidemic of loneliness among adults, right? And how many adults don't have as many close friends or struggle socializing, or they go out to a bar and sit on their phone because they don't like because they're awkward and how do you think like and this is, theoretically, like, how do you think this will affect? How do you think a generation that has such stunted social skills will affect, society at large?
So I would say that this is kind of outside of the purview of what we do. We really train
Hmm.
teachers and administrators and help people with policy and build out free curriculum for people. But what I would say, because I'm in touch with a lot of people,
Hmm.
there is a genuine concern that the rise of technology, because it's disconnected and dislocated us from each other, will result in things like fewer birth rates, right?
Hmm.
Fewer marriages, fewer like because people aren't putting themselves out there. When I talk about AI, I really think this can be a profound technology for good for schools, but I
Hmm.
also worry about, just one example, AI companions.
Oh yeah.
Think of them like AI imaginary friends. They talk to you, right? And you think they're like real people. They're not. It's just a giant prediction device, and sometimes they can go off kilter. And we've had a few AI companions, it looks like, have directed kids how to harm themselves, and in some cases, how to kill themselves.
Hmm.
And so, if you're a kid today in high school, you could in the morning put your white earbuds in, your
Hmm.
earbuds, and talk to your AI companion on the way to school on the bus. Take your earphones out during class. Maybe you don't participate. You don't, you listen, but you're not participating. You go to lunch, you put your AirPods
Hmm.
in again, and either you talk to your companion or you're on social media, and you could literally go through a day or a week without having another real human interaction if you so chose. And so there's a real danger to this, and I don't want to overstate it. I recognize technology is here. We have to find a balance, and if you're a parent, you always want balance for your kids. But I think there's a growing concern that based on what happened with social media and cell phones, that we don't want to make the same mistake twice with AI.
Yeah, no, I 1,000% agree with you. And I did an episode about the dangers of AI companions about a year ago. That came out about a year ago or a little less. I don't know when this is going to come out, but like a year ago or so around that because of the mental health concerns around it. And then, I'm also, frankly, to build on what you're saying, I 1,000% agree with you. To build on what you're saying, one of the things that really concerns me is the increases in or the advances in the robotic space. And when you combine
Mm.
robotics and AI, and now all of a sudden you have a robot companion that has an AI agent in it that's trained on you, right? Like, like that's just real concerning, right? And as and
It,
go ahead.
I
Go
was
ahead.
just going to say it seems like science fiction, but
Hmm.
it's coming, right? And if you there's a group they're very well respected called the Rhythm Project, RITHM, and they talk about this issue of loneliness, and they talk about how you are going to see robots in the future that can substitute as your girlfriend or your husband or your wife, right? And like then, what are we going to do? Where is the human connection and what problems are going to arise from that?
Yeah, absolutely. And not even to mention that, who owns the data, right? Because these are
Correct.
going to need to have these things are going to be updated, and like folks like Google and like Facebook or Meta, TikTok, all these guys, they make money selling your data. They want to serve you ads, right? And if now you take that out of the virtual world and put it into a robot, right? The thing's going to need updates. It's going to need to be serviced, right? All these things are going to need to happen. How are you going to who owns all of that data in the back end, and how will that be used to manipulate the society at large, right?
It's such a great point. And, with families, we know that parents don't always understand what kids are up to, right? Like, we work with Common Sense Media, which is kind of a clearinghouse for trying to keep kids safe with all things technology, to build a parent toolkit to help them talk about AI and what it is and what it isn't. And the idea behind it is, we need parents to understand in a deep way what this can do and also what it can't do. What are the pitfalls and the possibilities so
Hmm.
that they're educated consumers and they can have discussions with their kids about it. And Common
Hmm.
Sense Media did a statistic where they found that I think more than 70% of kids have an AI companion in high school or its equivalent. But only 30% of parents know their kids are on any kind of AI at all, right? And so there's a huge gulf about what's happening. And parents need to understand that their children's data, every time they touch a keystroke, is up for grabs.
Hmm.
And frankly, school systems are just figuring that out in the last few years that, these people that offer you free programs, well, sometimes it's not free because they're mining kids' data and then turning it over and selling that to different people.
Yeah,
And
no,
so our children this generation of kids is already the most surveilled generation, in the history of the world. But I don't think parents understand like that goes beyond just like, cameras at stoplights and things like that. And, cameras at schools. This is, every time they're online on their phones or on their computers, they're hitting keys and that's being tracked in some cases. And parents just need to be very aware of that possibility and try to figure out how to, ensure that their kids' privacy is being protected.
yeah, I mean, it's the most surveilled generation so far, Jeff, right? I think it's going to continue to, it's going to, because the amount of data that you can collect on, like when you call it like a Google search or you're looking online for something, the amount, and I know we've all done it where you have maybe you have a smart speaker in your house and you're talking about something and you get served ads, you know, say for a trip to Barbados or whatever, and you were just talking about going to Barbados, like the amount of data you can collect in that way is one thing, right? And there's a reason that companies like Google are making baby monitors, right? Is because they want to build a profile on you from birth, right? But uh, uh, that's one thing, but the amount of data you can collect when it's a two-way text interaction like you have with, call it a Gemini or a ChatGPT or a Claude, that's a different level altogether. And very, 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 very smart people are using that data to serve ads to you, right? And to get you to buy stuff. But not just that, to get you to think certain things and act in certain ways, and and I think it's only going to continue to get worse. I think privacy is kind of a myth these days.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And I think what we're seeing, I think part of the reason for a lot of the polarization in the country is because people are being basically placed in an echo chamber where they keep being fed, not a balanced situation, not both sides of the story, but one side of the story, right? And they just get caught up thinking this is the way the world is when, how do we ensure that our kids can really truly get a balanced information download, if you will, so
Mhm.
they're able to make good decisions for themselves.
I completely agree. I 1,000% agree. One of my favorite sayings is that if two people are having a conversation and they agree on everything, one of them doesn't need to be there, right? Um, I love having conversations with people from different backgrounds, different walks of life, right? Because that's how you learn and expand and grow your mindset, right? And I think that helps create well-rounded humans.
I think that's indeed right. And my concern for us right now as a country is we've got people on the edges who are really have big voices, and there's kind of a silent majority that's afraid to speak up because they're afraid they'll get canceled by either side. And what I would argue is until the silent majority truly starts speaking up, we're going to be in this kind of culture war negative situation where we've got to be able to agree to disagree. We've got to be able to have disagreements, and we've got to be able to kind of put ourselves out there and entertain other people's ideas, even if they're different than their own.
I, uh, I 1,000% agree, and I think that I think that we can work our way through this, but the only way we're going to do it is by talking to each other, which brings us back to what we're talking about around AI in schools and promoting social skills, right? And so something you touched on earlier is the educational depression that you have seen around test scores flatlining around or maxing, I think you said 2012 or so. And how much do you attribute that to like tech and social media versus everything else that is going on in children's lives?
Yeah, I think there are some people who will tell you it's just strictly technology, and it's true that it lines up incredibly well with kind of the rise of high school kids or kids in general having cell phones in large percentages. But I
Mhm.
think it's more than that. I think in education, we did something called education reform, And it worked for the first 15 years, and we put some systems and structures in. But I think it kind of lost pace after a while, as these things do, and we need a new revolution in education.
Hmm.
And ironically, I think AI, because of its ability to make teachers' lives easier, and allow them to get back to the business of focusing on building great lessons for kids, can start that next revolution if it's done well.
Yeah, absolutely. And for somebody like a say a superintendent or a principal who's listening to this podcast who's never heard of Day of AI, can you talk about like what you are offering, the offerings that you do have and how it shows up in classrooms?
Yeah, so we're a fusion of what I would call young MIT techies and
Hmm.
experienced, read old educators like myself.
Hmm.
They know the technology in a deep way, and we know what works in classrooms and how to apply it. And it's been this kind of fabulous marriage of a small but mighty team. And what we do is really three things. Like we train teachers and administrators how to use this tool, how to use these tools safely and productively. We help districts think through policy and how to set a policy in a time when this technology is moving so rapidly. And then we create and help districts and teachers create AI infused curriculums and AI literacy curriculums because kids are going to need to understand how to do that. And to that last point, we've always talked about education being the three R's: reading, writing, arithmetic. We stretch the last R. Well, I'm now going to say it's 4 R's. I'm going to stretch the last R further. It's reading, writing, arithmetic, and artificial intelligence skills. Because I think, in the world we're going to, in the future economy, I
Hmm.
don't think AI is going to replace humans. I mean, certainly sectors will be impacted, some jobs will be lost, others will be gained in different areas. But I do think in the future, people with AI skills are going to replace those people without AI skills.
Hmm.
And if that's the case, then our children need to have a deep understanding of AI literacy so that they can be kind of the masters of this content, know what it is and what it's not, and how to use it both safely and effectively. And the reality is, and a lot of people don't know this, in 2029, the PISA International Assessment is going to be given. That's usually a test that compares us to other countries in math and reading and science. Well, for the first time in 2029, they're going to offer a discrete AI literacy test and going to test what kids know about AI and how to use it. And it's going to be embarrassing if we're the country that created artificial intelligence,
Hmm.
but we scored 29th in the world on our kids
Yeah.
being able to use it.
Yeah, no, and I love the focus on literacy. To you, what is like from a functional perspective, how like what is AI literacy?
Yeah, for me, it's understanding the pros and cons of AI. And so, if you're a kid, you need to know about voice clones, deep fakes, hallucinations, energy consumption, bias, plagiarism. There's a lot of AI companions, data privacy. There's a lot of negatives that kids need to be taught about so they can be educated consumers and be healthy skeptics of this technology. But
Hmm.
then on the positive side, this is a tool that can help kids go faster and further than they ever could before. A lot of people talk about it like the calculator,
Hmm.
where initially people were afraid, oh, kids won't be able to do math. But in fact, with graphing calculators, kids can do deeper math than they've ever been able to do. I like to think of AI as like the moving walkway in an airport. You can just stand on it and can move you along pretty quickly. Or you can walk on that walkway and it's almost like you're running. And these tools and knowing how to use them will make you competitive in the new economy that we don't even know, what it's going to shape out to be or what it looks like. And so what I think is if I'm a parent, which I am, I want my kids to have a knowledge base, number one, and then I want them to have an understanding of this tool and its pluses and minuses so that they can be the most competitive in this future marketplace.
Yeah, and the measured productivity gap, I want to say from like a year and a half ago or so, I believe it was Stanford that did a study. People that use AI as a function of doing their job are, over 40% more productive than those who don't, right? And there's absolutely, that's absolutely, and like that was a year and a half ago, right? And something that I always like to tell people that I remind folks is that the AI you're using today, this is the floor. This is the worst it's going to be for the rest of your life, right? And so if you have to understand how to not just use it, but how to effectively use it, right? Because there are things that AI should be doing, there are things AI shouldn't do. Um, you need to go out of your way to make sure
Well,
that
let's talk about that
you're.
because that is. That is a crucial point, Nick. What you're talking about now is maybe one of the most important points um, about what AI should do for you and what it shouldn't do for you.
Hmm.
Um, and in the world, I talked earlier about kids needing to have a knowledge base so they can understand how to use this tool safely and productively. Well, I have ChatGPT on my phone.
Hmm.
It's replaced Google in many ways for me, but I
Hmm.
fight with ChatGPT at least twice a day because I know it's giving me bad information because
Hmm.
sometimes it doesn't produce the right information for you, which is what everybody needs to understand.
Hmm.
But I can only fight with it if I know it's bad information and I have that knowledge base. If I just accept what this technology is telling me, my brain's going to atrophy, all
Hmm.
right, and I'm going to become a drone and I'm not going to use my brain and I'm going to become actually dumber. So
Yeah.
we've got to find that right balance between kids really flexing their brain as a muscle and then being able to use this tool. And what I would argue is I think kids need to prove that they have a knowledge base first before we should even let them use the tool. Much
Hmm.
like, my kids when they wanted to drive and they turned 16, I didn't just throw them the car keys.
Hmm.
I put them in driver's education, and then
Hmm.
I sat in the front seat white knuckling as they tried to, learn how to drive,
Hmm.
right? AI is an even more powerful tool than a car. We need to make sure that our kids have AI education, AI literacy, so that they can, and maybe take a test, so they can prove they know X, Y, and Z and can use this tool safely and effectively.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree with you. And where do you think that generally that falls, right? When you think about, I think that AI being used to personalize lessons for, say, fifth graders is awesome. But when you start thinking about like, what is it, like K through three, 4 to 8, 9 to 12, right? So lower school, middle school, high school, where do you think it belongs? Not like as far as like lesson personalization as a tool that the teachers use, but where do you like when do you think kids should be trusted with that?
Yeah, so I'm going to answer that question, but I want to go back because you're just
Yeah.
spawning popcorns going off in my brain uh, about certain things. You talked about this is the lowest level of AI we're ever going to have,
Hmm.
and that couldn't be more correct. People need to think about this now. Maybe your people are younger, but I'm so old that I remember when there was no internet. But when the internet first came out, and when I was in my 20s,
Hmm.
it was very slow dial-up. You've got mail, right?
Yep.
And it took
Hmm.
forever. It was clunky and slow,
Hmm.
not this high speed stuff we have now. People should think of AI as being the same thing, right?
Yep.
It's kind of clunky right now. It's going to get better. It's going to be faster, more efficient. But for right now, this is the base case for what we have. It's
Yep.
going to get better. Now,
Absolutely.
your
Real quick
question.
on that, I would estimate based on the internet, like development of the internet, right? When you think about that as an allegory, we're in the mid to late 90s right now.
Absolutely.
Or,
That's
as it relates to AI. So, AOL is sending you CDs in the mail. AOL is sending you CDs in the mail.
You're not old enough to know that. Good for you.
Yes, I am, Jeff. Yeah, they're sending you CDs in the mail. Like there is no video. You can't stream anything, right? There is
Yeah.
no streaming. When you want to look at a picture, it's gonna load pixel by pixel. So like that's where we were, right? And I think that's where we are now. Like we haven't hit the turn of the century. It's pre 9/11 in AIAs.
I think that's right. And like what I would say to people is it's going to be okay, right? Like my kids
Hmm.
like to tease me, "Hey, tell us again when there was no internet and the phone was
Hmm.
attached to the wall and there
Yeah.
was no microwave ovens. How did you eat?" and stuff like that. Like they like to
Hmm.
tease me. But the reality is we figured all that stuff out.
Yeah.
We will figure out AI too, right? You just have to
Hmm.
dip your toe in the water. And the reality is, everyone's kind of already using AI. Every time you try to send a text and it tries to predict your next word, that's artificial intelligence. You're on Netflix and it tries to curate for you movies it thinks you will like based on your previous viewing history. That's artificial intelligence. We were
Hmm.
out in Arizona last year training all the state education commissioners on all things AI, and we took a Waymo, a self-driving car.
It's amazing.
That that's
Yeah.
artificial intelligence, and that's
Hmm.
coming, and that's going to be the reality of the future. So we've just got to accept it and just start the process, right? You don't
Hmm.
have to be an expert. People that say they're experts in AI, well, I question that because I think the people at MIT will say there's no such thing because the tech keeps changing and moving so quickly.
Hmm.
But that just means you just have to start. You've got kind
Yep.
of free range to make some mistakes and try things out. Uh,
Hmm.
Back to your other question,
Yeah.
we actually build curriculum from K to 12 for AI literacy. But when you look at our curriculum for younger kids, a lot of it is analog. The idea is like we can teach you about AI without having you to be in front of a cell phone or a laptop.
Hmm.
We can teach you how to prompt by having you instruct the teacher who pretends to be an alien, hey, teach me how to make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich.
Hmm.
Um, and it's a fun game and activity to do with kids, but they learn very quickly. They have to be precise in their directions
Hmm.
because the first thing they say is put the peanut butter on the bread. And when you take the jar of peanut butter and slam it on the loaf of bread, they
Hmm.
realize, wait a minute, this is not the first direction. I've got to be very specific in
Hmm.
my directions. Well, that's what coding is, which is specific directions, but it's also what good prompting is. The more specific you can be in your prompts, the better information you're going to get out of
Hmm.
Chat or Claude or Gemini or whatever you're using.
Yeah, absolutely, you will. No, you absolutely will. And I like the idea of the, doing that coding test to teach kids about prompting as well. Because that's super important. One of the things that I've been reading recently, I mean, this is at the college level, but a lot of professors at the college level, because of use of AI, are ditching like written tests, or some of them are ditching written tests and going back to like verbal, verbal quizzing and talking to people, like, and actually having a two-way conversation as the exam, like, back to like ancient Greek times. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think people are really handling this in a different way. Like plagiarism is the number one concern, particularly at the high school level and the college
Mhm.
level, right? And so
Yeah.
what you've seen, Harvard University, at least the last time we checked, has kind of a very high 50,000-foot statement on AI, but really what they're doing is defaulting to individual professors to decide what they want kids to do. Some professors are digging into this and saying, we want you to use AI. Other professors are at the other end of the spectrum saying, don't use AI at all.
Hmm.
When I talk to high school teachers, I had a really horrific but funny story at the same time. This teacher was telling me, the kid wrote a paper with Gemini and had to get up in front of the class and present the paper. And the idea was the kid was just going to read the paper. Well, the kid couldn't pronounce the words that were written. So it was very clear early
Hmm.
on that this wasn't the kid's actual writing or thinking or anything like that. And so what we've tried to say to high school teachers at least is, and to districts is, don't start with the school committee. School committees do policies that usually last 10 or 20 years.
Hmm.
Start in your student handbook at high school. Start from a statement of values. All districts have statements of values. Almost one of them is always, we value academic integrity. Right. If you value academic integrity, then a kid needs to disclose if they're going to use a chatbot or an AI program. And the
Hmm.
teacher also needs to disclose if they want you to use one or not and what that looks like. And the idea is from an old 80s song, which is hold on loosely, but don't let go. Right.
Hmm.
And just start the process. Let's let it shake out. We've seen some teachers try to ban it. That doesn't always work.
Hmm.
Uh, I have said it's okay. Some teachers have decided, like, well, kids can write from home usually, but once a quarter, I'm going to make them write an essay in class using a blue book. And to our younger readers, listeners, ask an older listener or
Hmm.
someone in your family that's older what a blue book is, and have them write in the blue books and then compare that to what they've been turning in from their home life. And you can see very quickly if it's their writing or if it's ChatGPT's writing.
Hmm.
And so there's analog ways to look at it. But the other thing is, you can also just change your educational practice. You can have the kids research at home for homework and then have them come in and compile that research into an essay in the classroom. So there's
Right.
different ways to skin the cat. That's a terrible metaphor, but
Hmm.
because I've got a cat, we would never skin her.
No.
There's different ways to go about this, and it's not the end of the world. I have to remind teachers across this country, listen, we've seen this before. When I was a kid, they had these things called Cliff Notes,
Hmm.
which is the analog version of what this is, right?
Oh, yeah.
Where kids are always trying to get an edge and, cut corners. This is just a different way. You have the wisdom that younger kids don't have yet. We'll be able to work on this together.
Yeah, no, we will. And I mean, like to your point about cliff notes and cutting corners, like I also think that's a valuable skill to learn as a child, right? It's like how do you game the system and how do you work the system, right? Um,
I'm
you
not
know,
sure as the former education commissioner I can condone that, but okay, fair
but
enough.
you know where I'm coming from. Is like knowing how to work within the bounds of a system and do like work within the bounds of a system and what's allowed, and still like minimize your workload is absolutely something that people like. I'm not saying you should condone people learning that, Jeff. What I am saying
Yes.
is that from a whole human education perspective, that's a valuable skill to have.
Time
Um,
management is an important skill.
Correct. Absolutely. No,
Okay.
absolutely it is. But and then, again, I love your point about how, they are, and I love learning because I just learned that like a lot of these folks are pushing it down to the individual teachers, right? Because I think that, you can't write a policy at a 50,000 foot view, right? That will address the needs of a first grader and a third grader and a ninth grader equally, and they're all from different socioeconomic backgrounds as well, right? And that's I think is another huge point is that like the socioeconomic piece of this is massive about how like we may be able to help kind of level some of the educational playing field.
Yeah, so this is a fascinating point. It's something we're starting to see interesting. We're had a lot of connections to community colleges.
Hmm.
I've said most of my career in urban education. A lot of my kids would wind up going to community colleges, and maybe they go on to four-year degree after that. But they'd start at community colleges, and the
Hmm.
community colleges are starting to recognize like if we can create a degree program in AI that these children may come out of a 2-year program with more skills than a history teacher might coming out of a 4-year Ivy League institution and might
Hmm.
be more employable, right?
Right.
And so that could really significantly change how we think about educating our kids and what's important and what's not important. And
Hmm.
so, you almost think of it like a vocational trade that you're learning is how to use this new technology.
Absolutely. No, and I like that everybody's approaching it all differently, and I'm a big fan of community college. My only college degree is from a community college. But I like that yeah, I like that people are approaching it differently. One of the things I don't like is the complete ban on it, right? And so I just had lunch earlier this week with two people, one of whom's a big wig at a company, and he brought his newly graduated young lady along with him just because she wanted to learn like business development and wanted to be involved in some meetings. And it's like, yeah, sure, let's sit down and have a conversation. And she just graduated, I forget from which school, I want to say in the spring, right, of this year. And she said, interestingly, like every single college professor that she had, none of them let them use AI except for one, right? One guy did because he's like, dude, and he literally told them, this is the future. This is the wave of the future, and not allowing you to use the tools that you're going to be allowed to use in the real world is a detriment to you, right? And I think that again, like my view of parenting, right, is like, excuse me, my view of parenting is that it's our job to create an environment for our children to take like low grade, like I'm not gonna say low grade, but take calculated risks and learn cause and effect and learn action and reaction. And if you're not like empowering your child to take risks, I think that's to their own detriment, right?
Indeed.
And I think it's the same thing when schools. I think schools largely is a low stakes version of what the professional world can be. And if you're not allowed to learn how to use these tools while you're in school, I think that that is a detriment to the professional that you will become one day.
I think that's right. And it kind of goes back to my 4 R's, right? Like kids just
Hmm.
need to understand this, right?
Yeah.
And, but it's also incumbent upon the adults to figure out the proper system for kids doing that because
Hmm.
what the danger here, one of the dangers here is we just, off cognitively offload our brain power to this technology,
Yeah.
and then, we become kind of this group of drones walking around, just, drooling on ourselves.
Hmm.
So how do we make sure kids have that knowledge base so then they can use it effectively? It's,
Yeah.
you almost have to, it's like training for a marathon,
Hmm.
do the work, and then AI itself can be the marathon. You can do it with that
Hmm.
technology. But first, you've got to put in the miles and practice all the time and make sure you're up to doing it.
I completely agree, and it's a it's a fine line to shoot as a parent, and to folks like myself who have young, as a young child now, like what advice do you give parents around introducing this technology to their children and what are like the best ways to have that conversation and what are the lessons you feel like they should really make sure that they're imparting?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, it's going to be okay,
Yeah.
right? People
Hmm.
get very nervous about these things, but it's going to be fine. What I recommend to parents, first and foremost, is balance, right? Everything in moderation. Um, it's not
Including moderation.
exactly. Exactly. To your free range ideas, right? So, I
Hmm.
mean, I think, it's going to be okay. But, if part of the reason we built a toolkit for families with Common Sense Media was to give them kind of the tools and videos they need to understand this technology so they can have discussions with their kids.
Hmm.
And the most important thing you can do is just talk about it with your kid. Even though we know sometimes the kids know more about technology than we do, that's okay.
Hmm.
The fact that you're asking questions is really important because kids know that someone's thinking about this and looking out for you
Hmm.
versus a kid that thinks they can do whatever they want and there's no consequences, right? Like that's a dangerous thing to have. And so if kids can just have conversations with their parents every once in a while about these things, I think it's the most important thing you can do. And then as a parent, just try to educate yourself,
Yeah.
right? You can go on our website. It's, the information's all free, and download the video and learn about this a little bit and then talk to your kid about it.
Yeah, and that's part of why I started the podcast was to learn about this, right? And understand what is going on, understand what it is and what it's not, and understand also how to talk to my kid about it, right? And how do you shoot the gap between raising an AI native child and not teaching them to over rely on the tech.
Well, that's exactly right. And the most important thing I can say is there are no AI experts. We're all learning this together,
Hmm.
right?
Absolutely.
And I learn every day, right?
Hmm.
I spent 32 years in public education. I know a lot about teaching and learning. I
Hmm.
know a lot about children, and I'm learning every day about AI. And you just have to dip your toe in the water and begin.
100%, man. And as I know that obviously we're talking a lot about personalization of lessons and like schools aren't going to build their own AI, agent to do this, right? When you're talking to tech directors and superintendents in different districts, across the country, what are some of the things that you make sure that they know about and about the contracts that they have when they're talking to AI vendors about coming in to provide toolkits, right? What are some of the things that these folks first have to ask? And second, more importantly, what are some of the things that they need to insist are in the contract?
So, as you know, tech directors in schools are under siege right now from AI vendors trying to hawk their wares and their products
Hmm.
at schools, oftentimes offering it for quote unquote free, even though you and I both know there's no such thing as free.
Mm-mm.
And, I give an example of there's an AI attention detection device. It's that somebody's trying to sell. It's basically a camera that sits on the teacher's desk and tracks students' eye movements to see if they're paying attention during class.
Hmm.
Before you buy that product, you might want to make sure you socialize that with families and kids because I can tell you when I've showed this to high school kids, they're freaked out. Some of them are like, this is Orwellian. We talk about the most
Hmm.
surveilled generation ever. Like, you're going to start tracking my eye movements from kindergarten on. And people and a lot of parents have a lot of problems with that.
Yeah.
And I will say to you, between us, if people were tracking my attention in high school, I probably would have never been commissioner of education because,
Yeah, absolutely.
I was
No,
a
and that
little
and that
more
also
distracted back then.
yeah, and that also but like the tracking the eye movements thing, that also comes back to data collection, right? Like
Mhm.
what data is being collected, where does that go, right? And then because when you start thinking about it from an advertiser's perspective, right? If I know what kind of content you draws your eyes and draws your attention, and I can then using these LLMs because it would not you can't it's not just about personalizing education. You can also personalize advertising at a granular level that never could have happened before, right? And if I understand what draws your attention, I can personalize ads to you in a way that was not possible 10 years ago.
Absolutely. Nobody knew what geofencing was 10 years ago.
Nope.
Nobody knew all these different ways that
Hmm.
people are coming after you and your kids to try to get information in front of your eyeballs.
Hmm.
And so the tech directors serve as that kind of primary guardian
Hmm.
for all of the school district, right? And so Many of them are pretty good about this, but they've come to really realize that everything is up for grabs, and that when things people are saying, "Yeah, we'll offer this for free," okay, well, I need to know where the data is going
Hmm.
because I want to protect my kids. My kids have rights, and the tech directors, as not surprisingly, often know more about the tech than a superintendent does or a principal does, and so they have to be kind of leaders in the field in making sure that whatever they bring into their districts, they're doing in a way that it's as protected as possible.
Yeah.
And we know, like we've seen, data breaches in some of
Hmm.
our most famous education applications that are being used. We had a big data breach recently. And parents just want to be sure that their kids, information is being held secret or sacred to the greatest
Hmm.
extent possible.
Yeah, and I would also like just to add to that, I would make sure that you know where the data actually lives, right? Is it
Mhm.
on-prem in your is it on-prem? Is it in a cloud-hosted service like a AWS or a GCP or an Azure, right? And if so, where are those servers actually sit, right? And where does it go? Because most folks don't know this, that like, just because you save something to the iCloud, like Apple doesn't necessarily store that data in the US, right? Without telling you, they can move it out of the US and then back into the US, right? And then it falls under a whole bunch of like there's different levels of protections associated with that data once it crosses international borders. And if they do this, and we all know that this has happened to our own data a lot, right? We just have no idea. So make sure you know where the data is actually being stored.
No, I think that's really important and it's crucial for the tech directors. It's just, look, it's hard for your average person. Like we've all been there. Like
Hmm.
somebody wants to, you're agreeing to something, right? You're not reading the, 13-page memo written in point 0.2 font about what's happening with this, whatever you're agreeing to purchase, right? And we just click on it and assume that it's going to be okay. And I guess we can do okay with that. But if you're a tech director, you have an added responsibility because you've got so many children under your purview to
Hmm.
really make sure you read the fine print and you go through the red tape, if you will,
There you
to
go.
make sure that we're keeping our kids safe.
Yeah, have a lawyer review the contract. Biggest
Mhm.
thing, right? Like,
Absolutely.
no, but I don't think anybody really likes paying legal fees, but like you pay legal fees to save yourself money in the long run and save yourself headaches and time in the long run.
Yeah, it's that's exactly right. It's penny wise, pound foolish. And I think, most districts have a general counsel on hand, and if they can't do it, they know somebody that's more um, conversant in this kind of tech litigation and tech legal issues. And so it's small money compared to what it could be if you had a problem.
Hmm. Absolutely. And I know that you guys just opened, or have some program hubs, or Day of AI has program hubs internationally as well. I think I read Indonesia, Rwanda, Colombia. I think there's a few more also. What are you
Yeah.
learning from schools outside the US that you feel that American educators really need to hear?
Well, it's two very different kinds of systems. Most countries outside of the US are top down,
Hmm.
so if the minister in Colombia says that Day of AI is going to teach all the teachers and train, their expert teachers who then will train the rest of their peers. That's what we did. We did the same thing in Rwanda. We trained, some of the expert teachers. They're going to train the rest of the 5,000 teachers in Rwanda. So but in America, it's a very different system. It's a local control system. So we don't have one unified message across the country. Instead, every district is trying to figure this out on their own. Every state is trying to figure this out on their own. And so we have this patchwork quilt of policies, procedures, regulations, and approaches, some of which are good, some of which aren't. And what I've tried to argue is that this may be the one, and I believe in local control in education, but this may be the one time where we need to think more about this as like a Sputnik moment, where we as a country need to come together and adopt a national framework for our kids to keep them safe. Because as we talked about earlier about the PISA exam, it's going to be embarrassing if we're not a top performing country in AI literacy in 2029. And I'm afraid that's exactly what's going to happen if we keep doing things the way we're doing it right now.
Well, it's a good thing we have such an experienced Secretary of Education to make sure that we're guided properly. And definitely not somebody that just used to be the wife of a dude that ran a wrestling company. But hey, that may be a little too far there, Jeff.
No comment. We're all God's children.
Hey man, no, 100%. And so, no, we are, and I actually am inclined to agree with you, and from that perspective, around around potentially looking at a top-down approach, at least at a state level, and it's not, I think that like local control around a lot of things is super important, but when you look at setting policies that are going to have such a profound impact on all of the communities, right? I think that we need to I think that first we need to take input from the folks at the ground, the folks
Yeah,
locally, and then at the same time we need to have a conversation about what do we really want to do en masse to make sure that we can make sure that we can meet these folks' needs, because if we don't, my concern is, test scores are going to continue to fall like they have been since 2012. Like we just didn't do anything with social media and phones for a long, long time, and until we realized that there was a problem. And I think that if we do the same thing with AI, like that's going to be even worse.
I completely agree.
Yeah, man. And so what are some of the like if you could like if there was one policy that you could implement that like at either district, state, or federal to keep kids safe from AI while still letting them benefit from it, what would it be?
I think for me, one of the things we're hoping to do is to build kind of an AI driver's license test where kids have to prove
Hmm.
both they have facility in math, reading, science, but also prove they understand the technology of AI. They understand the pros and cons. And if they could then pass that test, that would be the one thing that I
Hmm.
would recommend to make sure that all of our kids are really set up for success with this new technology.
Yeah, man. And 10 years from now, man, if we say, we're
Yeah.
looking back from, 2035, right? What would have to be true for you to say that we handled AI in schools better than social media? And on the flip side, like what are some of the things that keep you up at night around some of the same mistakes we're going to repeat?
Yeah, I mean, the dream scenario is that our kids get smarter and can go faster and further than they ever could before. The
Hmm.
nightmare scenario is that they offload their brain power to the technology and become drones and, aren't full human beings that can interact with each other and with the world. And what
Hmm.
we're trying to do is make sure that when they do use this tool, they can use it in a way that's going to be a benefit to them and not a detractor to them, right? And so a kid that can use this to build, a new app to help with climate issues or a medical device that could, save people's lives. That's really possible. That's the
Hmm.
possible future. But there's also a possible future where kids are, deciding they want to marry a robot and they just talk to their robot all day long and
Hmm.
they're, for lack of a better phrase, helpless and inert.
Yeah. No, and I think both of them will be true, probably. It's just going to be different parts. And my hope is that there's going to be more of the former than the latter. I think that as with anything, and I don't care, and I don't care what behavior it is, right? You can talk about like making money, you can talk about, drugs, you can talk about alcohol, you can talk about smoke. Like there's anything, like there's going to be people that go too far, there's going to be people that handle it well, and there's going to be people who abstain from it, right?
Yeah.
And I think that the goal is to have more people that handle it well than those that don't. And I think that, finding a common sense approach to it is super, super important. I love the focus on education and not just educating, not just educating the children, but talking to the school districts, talking to teachers, talking to parents, and helping them understand. Because I think that like when you think about it, ChatGPT came out a little over 3 years ago, or 3.5 did a little over 3 years ago. When you look at the pace of change over the last 3 years and how it's accelerated and how I think is going to continue to accelerate. And who I think anybody that talks about what's going to happen beyond 18 months to 3 years from now is just making it up, right? Uh, so how do we make sure that we are setting everybody up for success? And I think that having these conversations is the most important part, Jeff. I really appreciate it. Go ahead, man.
No, I was just gonna say, it's about people educating themselves, and I appreciate you having me on because I think, we're just trying to get the word out, right? There's a
Hmm.
gulf between what parents know. There's been some fear amongst teachers, but teachers are our most important resource in education,
Hmm.
and I actually think this is going to make their lives better, and
Hmm.
they just got to jump in and try.
I completely agree, man. Is there anything I missed, Jeff? Anything I forgot to
No,
ask?
I mean, I guess I'd recommend if people have the time or inclination, if they want to go to dayofai.org,
Hmm.
and if they put in their email address, we promise we won't sell your data, and we won't even spam you with too many emails. We'll send you an email here and then giving you updates on what we're up to, but they can get behind the curtain of our website and have access to everything for free. So whether that's tools for teachers, curriculum for teachers, resource kits for parents, it's all there and it's all available.
Yeah, no, really, really appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I know you're very busy, and really appreciate you lending your expertise, man. It's been a fascinating conversation.
Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. Everybody out there, thank you so much for listening to Robots and Red Tape. Check out Day of AI, and I hope you guys are having a great day.